Hi, and welcome to FDM, the channel dedicated to federal data markets. Well, today I want to discuss COVID in South Africa. This is based on a number of simulations I've done recently, which point to the end of COVID approaching. So I got all excited of doing these simulations, and I was thinking that we may be done, and this is what this slideshow is about today. So let's get going. Well, first of all, let's see, how does COVID end? If we simulate this pandemic, what does the end look like? And here you see a number of simulations using different contact rates. So this black one uses 2.5, a contact rate of 2.5 per week. This one of 2, and that one 1.5. So here what you see is the curve flattening to some extent. And of course, as the curve gets flatter, the time that the pandemic takes to work itself through the population is much longer. However, what you also should note is that it's asymmetric. This starts building on 1st of January, and it takes quite a few months to build up to its peak, and then it collapses rapidly, much more rapidly than it takes to build up. And that's even more so for the ones with a higher contact rate. The quicker they rise, the faster they fall. Here you can see the one with the lower contact rate takes longer to build up, but also takes slower to work itself out the population. And what's happening here, the sharp fall that you see, is really that by the time we reach the peak, everybody is infected. The whole population is infected. There's nobody left, nobody remaining to be infected, and the thing just implodes in upon itself. Now, what I'm plotting here is the percentage of the population that's infected at this point. So it's not just the new infections, but also the infections that are the percentage of the population that's currently infected. So it might look a little bit different to what you're used to, but the difference being that this is, if you want, also last week's infections. It's not just the new infections of this week, but everybody that's infected at the moment. And that's really to illustrate. When we reach this point, more or less the whole population is infected. Nobody else left to infect, and the thing just collapses. So this is how the pandemic might end. We might have a final wave, and then after that a rapid drop off, and it's all over. So let's look at the actual data, especially in South Africa. Here you see the new cases in South Africa, as well as the 7-day moving average. And I'm specifically going to use this moving average. And you can see there during the first lockdown, we actually had our first wave. Here we had what's generally called the first wave, but another wave. And as you can see, in this wave, things built up slowly, peaked, and then dropped off slowly. It didn't drop off as rapidly as we saw in the simulations before. And also, it never dropped back to zero. It sort of stabilized at this level, and it remained there for a long time. Now September, October, November, it remained there for a long time. That level, I've calculated that to be about 1.6 thousand. About 1.6 thousand new cases per day. And that wasn't the end, of course. Then we had this incredible spike in December and January. But after that, we had an even faster drop-off. You can see that phenomenal collapse in the number of new cases. And this is what got me excited. Are we approaching the end of the simulation then? And as you can see, we are rapidly coming back towards this level. But the last day or two, unfortunately, you can see there we've punctured the moving average, and we may be moving up, which might cause this thing to break before it ramps through this level. But could this be the end? Let's look at some simulations. So I did a lot of simulations with different parameters. I chopped up the country in different barriers, random barriers that I generate to sort of reflect the way South Africa is split up in terms of geographic locations and urban populations, stuff like that. and then I would allow the pandemic to spread in these areas and also allow for travel between these areas. And I did a lot of simulation. I added barriers to the map. I allowed travel between these locations. I had the travel reflect more or less the lockdown levels we had. I increased the travel, and I used many different parameters to simulate the travel. And every time I got out with, it came out with values much higher than the actual figures. So I had to lower the contact rate, I had to put in less travel, and so I continued. Then I added, with a lower contact rate, I added even more travel and even more travel to try and get to the actual figures. And just to show you some of the end points, these ones I showed you just now are fairly early on in the outbreak, while what you see here is towards the end of the pandemic. And you can see towards the end, it spread into many of the different areas, and it's sort of working itself out in those areas and then collapsing. So if I look at the simulated versus the actual data, this is what's happening. Most, if not all, of these simulated outcomes were too low. They were lower than the actual data. So it seems to me that the actual dispersion of the pandemic is much higher than what I could simulate. Now, I could work on this a bit more, but I got really excited at this point because it seemed to me that at the moment, there's no way you can really stop this virus. If you go to any pocket in the population, the virus is either already there or getting there quickly. Because by now, the simulation starts when we got the first case in South Africa, and by now, in February of 2021, the virus has dispersed with any sort of assumption on travel and the barriers that you put in place. The virus has sort of spread to the whole of the country. And you can't really prevent it. The virus is already there. It's very difficult to prevent it, and it also seems, therefore, that it is now working itself out and the end is near. That's what it appears to be if I look at the simulations. So let's go back to actual data, and let's do a little bit of mathematics. At present, today, the number of deaths in South Africa is 47,382. Right? Now, the infection fatality ratio for this disease is put at about 0.65, 0.66. Right? But it's somewhere between 0.5 and 1, and sometimes even lower than 0.5, which means these numbers will go up. But let's use an infection fatality ratio of 0.65 and a fatality ratio number of 47,000. Then we get 7.3 million people that have been infected thus far. Okay, for these fatality ratios, that's the number of infected individuals. 9.5 million, 7.3 million, 4.7 million. And in South Africa, we have had about 1.5 million positive cases reported. If that's the actual figure that we had, it means that about, for these different ratios, about 1 in 3, 1 in 5, or 1 in 6 people were tested. And that seems about right. So of the number of positive cases, that represents about a 1 in 6, 1 in 5 rate of individuals that went for a test. So if so many were infected, then it means, given our population, it means that about 15% of the population have already been infected. So if I use the actual positive cases, that's only 2.5%. However, if I use the fatality ratio, then the number is much higher, and let's say 10 to 15% of the population have already been infected. And if you have 10 or 15% of the population infected, and there's any sort of travel and any sort of integration between the pockets of the population, it will spread everywhere. And that's what the simulation is showing me. Unless you contain it with this amount of the population being infected, it's simply going to spill over, and the end of the pandemic will be near. So, but the problem is, though, that let's say it's 15%. That 15% weren't infected simultaneously. Some of them have recovered and aren't spreading the disease anymore. And so while I think the logic makes sense, and the simulations are picking this up, that if you have a significant portion of the population infected, it just spreads everywhere in the blink of an eye. In reality, I think there's still some pockets left, because everyone is not infected at the same time, and because we have some isolation between the pockets. So if I go back to the actual data, I think if this moving average can puncture this level, let's call that the sort of natural level or the base of the pandemic, based on what we saw in this time period. If the moving average can convincingly puncture this level, the 1.6 or 1,600 new cases per day level, then we can aggressively ease down on lockdown regulations and hope that the pandemic is over, and keep a close eye on this to see if it spikes up again after those relaxations. However, at the moment, it seems we are slowing down. We are not ramming through this, but this moving average is sort of slowing down, and it might turn and hover around this level again, which would mean it's spreading to these new pockets at that point in time. Well, that's it for today. See you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.